Jerusalem, it would just have to be the end of the world. But that's not really true. So what happens is Jesus began talking about false Christ arising and things coming. And then he talks about the signs that would accompany that time when Jerusalem would be destroyed. The word days, I liked, if I'm getting a small class, I would just highlight in red pencil in my Bible. The word days is mentioned several times in verses 15 down through about 31. And those are the days that precede the destruction of Jerusalem. But then in verse 34, Jesus said, "This generation shall not pass away till all these things be accomplished. And heaven and earth shall pass away, but my word shall not pass." But there's a contrast. "Of that day and hour," not days, but "of that day and hour knoweth no one." I take it to be he's answered the questions in the order they were raised. When will these things be? What will be the sign of thy coming? And then of the end of the world. And of the end of the world, do you have signs that precipitate? No. And he says it will be like the days of Noah. They were marrying, giving in marriage, and then all of a sudden it was the end. He keeps on that and chapter 25 are together. And in two parables in the judgment scene, he's actually pointing people to the fact that what's going to happen eventually. What are those parables about? I'm sorry, what? That's right, yes. And the need in the first parable, we've got the parable of the what? All right, the 10 virgins. 5 were foolish, 5 were wise. They were prepared for the coming of the Lord. And then the parable of the what? The talents. And so are we using the opportunities that we have to ready ourselves for the coming of the Lord? Then in 31 through the end, he actually talks about how it will be when the Lord comes. A separation will be made. Those on his right versus those on his left. What he'll say, "Come, ye blessed of my Father, inherit the kingdom prepared for you from the foundation of the world." To those on his left, he'll say, what? "Depart. I never did." All right. Then he goes on. Then in 26, we move on to the last, the Thursday. And we have not yet. We have a couple of events here. What do we have in 26, 6 through 13? What is it? Mary does what? Anoints Jesus, and then Judas objects. Jesus reprimands Judas, and then he seeks to do what? 14, 15, and 16. Betray him. That's right. And then we have the events of the Last Supper, the institution of the Lord's Supper, and also what else happens to Jesus?
He gonna predict Peter's denial.
That's right. Yeah, we have he's in the garden, he's betrayed, then he's taken before Annas, and then Pilate. Not Annas and then Caiaphas, and then he's indicted by the Sanhedrin. In chapter 27, we continue on, and Judas sees that Jesus is going to be delivered up, and what does he do? He goes and hangs himself. And then the trial of Jesus is continued. We studied this. It doesn't seem like it was all that long ago. There were 2 main phases that we don't see when we read it straight. But he was taken to the Jewish phase, which of the 3 divisions of that: Annas, Caiaphas, and then the Sanhedrin. Then he was the Roman part of the trial of Jesus. He was taken to Pilate, then to Herod, and then back to Pilate, and then Pilate, of course, condemned him to die. So we have that in the 27th chapter. Jesus is before Pilate, and then we have him taken out and crucified. And then in chapter 28, what do we have? Matthew's account of the resurrection of Jesus. All right, good. And Mark, just the first few chapters of Mark, first 3, he begins quickly and goes right into whose work? John the Baptist. And then Jesus is baptized, he's tempted, and then we find in Mark 1 verse 16, Jesus is already in the region of Galilee. We have his great Galilean ministry. And there are a number of miracles that are chronicled there in chapter 1. In chapter 2, he heals a paralytic. Matthew or Levi is called, and he makes a feast for them. And then all of a sudden, there is hostility mounting because Jesus is performing some of his miracles on what? On the Sabbath day. And so we see that very, very quickly. And that takes us really through the end of chapter 3. Already in Galilee. Mark is, we mentioned Matthew's written primarily with the emphasis on Jesus, the kingdom of heaven. What does Mark emphasize? His miracles, his power. And it's the word immediately, or in the older translation, straightway, is used. Immediately he did this, and immediately that. And just one, people have stated before, it's almost like Mark was written for an American audience. With bullet points, boing, 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 it just quickly moves until you get to the last week. And we find that really in Mark 11 and following. Okay, comment, question? Anybody? All right, if not, let's turn to Acts 18. Acts 18. Let me see, as the fellow, let me see, said the blind man. Who was to take us through? The first journey, primarily what area was covered? Galatia, southern Galatia, Cyprus. Second journey, we've come to the point in Acts 18 where Paul is going to spend at least the most time that Luke records on the second journey. Where is it? Corinth. All right, without looking at a map, let's go through. We start off at what city over in Syria? Antioch. Who is Paul's traveling companion? Silas. All right. We go through Syria and Cilicia. We come to Lystra and pick up whom? Timothy. All right. We go through, and they would go on up into Asia and Bithynia. The Spirit forbade them. They come over to Troas, pick up Luke. How do you know it's Luke? The we. That's right. The pronouns begin to shift. All right. They set a straight, Paul saying is a man of Macedonia saying what? Come over and help us. So they go on to set a straight course through Samothrace, come eventually to Philippi, Acts 16. What two houses are converted? Lydia and the jailer. Acts 17. They leave there, and then I'm leaving out some of the details. Paul is staggering some of his companions there. 17, they come to Thessalonica. A reason for at least how many weeks? At least 3. And then Jason's house, what happens to that? It's assaulted by these Jews who stir up some of these the vile fellows of the baser sort, lewd fellows of the baser sort, King James says. All right, so they leave Thessalonica, then they go to Berea, and they were more noble than those in Thessalonica. They leave Berea, Jews in Thessalonica come to Berea and stir up problems, and then they leave Berea and go to Athens. He goes in their synagogue and then the marketplace. He's brought up to the Areopagus and gives his what? Gives his speech there. And he starts off by saying, the God that made the world. Okay, good. All right, so here we are. We're coming on down. Paul has left. Well, a couple of things I will mention here. He goes from Berea to Athens. Timothy joins him. And we pointed this out. Then Paul sends him back to Thessalonica because he's so concerned about the church there. Well, during the meantime, Paul goes to Corinth, about 50 miles, and he meets and lives with Aquila and Priscilla. They were of the same trade, which was tent makers. That's right. And so he preaches in the synagogue, and then in the house of Titus Justus, whose house joined hard against the synagogue, remained at least a year and a half, and wrote the 2 Thessalonian letters from here. All right, and we'll come to that in just a minute. So on to Corinth, and we looked at just a couple of these charts Sunday morning. Corinth's influence on the population. We talked about how the pagan idolatry stirred up all kinds of immorality. We looked at that. I think we stopped with this chart. One thing important about Corinth, you've got 29 chapters, 16 in 1 Corinthians, 13 in 2nd. 29 chapters are written to the Christians in Corinth. And then the books of 1st and 2nd Thessalonians and Romans will be written from Corinth. So it's a very important city relative to its spread. And here's the two seas, the isthmus, and there was a canal there. Splendor spanned both the Greek and Roman empires. First as a member of the Achaean League. I think I showed you some of that. So we're looking, this area right here would be right here where you're looking in between the two gulfs. Here's a canal that was built in the 6th century. This is not significant to know in the Bible. I recognize that. But it is to show, though, that how commercially driven the city was and how the culture had an impact on the church. In the 6th century BC, Ariander first conceived the idea to dig a canal through the isthmus to connect the Corinth and Saronic Gulfs. The project failed, as did later attempts by Greek and Roman rulers, but a road called the Diapas was constructed around this time. Nero actually started operations on the canal in 66 and 7 AD. He made the first strike at the land using his golden pick. Work was conducted by Jewish prisoners, but was interrupted by an insurrection in Gaul. The project was abandoned when Nero died. From 1882 to 1893, the French school investigated these beginnings of a canal, cut their own canal across the isthmus along Nero's route. This canal is too narrow for most of today's cargo and cruise ships. 2 bridges were built across the canal. You can see it under the writing here, for the railway and national road. On April 26, 1941, German parachutists captured these bridges, cut communication with British forces. Both bridges have been rebuilt. I've actually have some other pictures I've found that have some smaller ships going through the canal. This road ran from the city to its northern port in Latium. The road had a drainage system, was used for many centuries. And the harbor was the northern ancient port of Corinth, situated on the Corinth Gulf. It connected Corinth with the Western world, especially Italy. And the 5th century BC, Latium housed the Corinthian fleet and was later used by the Macedonians and the Romans for military purposes. Because of its importance, the port grew into a city of its own, housing various temples, remaining occupied for many centuries. So Corinth was kind of like the Atlanta of the southeast, as all roads went there. It was a very heavily commercialized city. Right? And here's another picture. You got the Acropolis, on which there would have been temples. And this would have been what was called the Bema, or the judgment seat. And it's used in Acts 18, where Gallio would have been there. There's pretty good evidence that this is actually what it was. It's kind of a raised platform and could be used like we do a pulpit, just a little raised, and judgments would be given. People would speak, oratory, worldly wisdom would be known to the people. Here's another picture of the shops in the Agora, the marketplace in the foreground, the Acropolis in the background. Another view of the Agora. Just think strip mall. Think strip mall when you think the Agora or the marketplace. And here again is another one. And you think about all kinds of dishonest business dealings going on. Paul dealt with that in 1 Corinthians 6. You remember some of the sins of which they had been guilty. All kinds of immorality there. Here's a picture of the temple to Apollo. It has 7 columns that still remain to this day. And it was actually in ruins at the time of the 1st century. It was 700 years old by Paul's time. And on the hill directly overlooking the Roman city main forum, its sturdy Doric columns served as a dramatic reminder of Corinth's ancient grandeur. But the temple was already in ruins. To Paul, it would have served merely as a sermon illustration of the impotence of the Greeks' pagan gods. That's from biblical archaeology. While this particular temple was in ruins during Paul's time, others were not. And their influences were extremely alive as we see Paul's letter to the Corinthians. Keep this in mind when we read of idols, temples, things sacrificed to idols. These are ruins of that. And a part of their worship involved drunkenness, banqueting, all manner of revelry. So this is the kind of culture into which the gospel first went. Now this is what's sometimes called the Erasmus inscription. In 1929, an inscription was discovered near the Agora that mentions Erastus. These are the words which is translated Erastus in return for his aedileship, or which was the Roman office of the aedile, basically a magistrate in charge of public works. He laid the pavement at his own expense. And so here's a marker to him. And it's interesting, he's mentioned a few times in the New Testament, being there at Corinth. When Paul, turn over to Romans 16 real quickly. When Paul is giving his final salutations to the Romans, now remember, he's writing the Roman letter from the city of Corinth, which is where we are in our study. Whoever has Romans 16:20, what's the passage? 16:23. Yeah, whoever has that first, read it.
Gaius, host to me and the whole church, greets you. Erastus, the city treasurer, greets you, and Quartus, the brother. Okay, Erastus, the treasurer of the city. Well, that little statement puts it where most say that this stone would date around AD 50, so the time element is right, and the very fact that he was that Paul said he was the treasurer of the city, and all this it fits. That it is highly likely that almost certainly refers to the Erastus whom Paul described as the treasurer of the city. Mentioned in two other occasions, in Acts 19:22, having sent into Macedonia two of them that ministered to him, Timothy and Erastus, he himself stayed in Asia for a while. And then in Paul's last letter, in 4:20 of 2 Timothy, Erastus remained in Corinth, but Trophimus I left at Miletus sick. So you have that at Corinth. That I think is significant. Okay. Do you think those?
Sir?
Those are two different people or one man?
Probably one man, I would think. Since he mentions he's a treasurer, and it goes hand in hand with the other, I would think.
Apparently then he became a Christian.
Yes. And that's and evidently a tremendous helper to Paul. Not just because Paul mentions him with going on journeys with Timothy. So all of those things are significant.
Yeah. At one point we have in a 50-mile radius the intellectual capital of the world at that point in time, and one of the commercial capitals of the world at that time.
Yes.
And you see what kind of condition they're in.
Yes. Both of them.
Yeah.
Both of them.
Yeah.
Good.
Building stone idols to worship.
Yes. All right. Let's do some reading. And why don't we, the first 17 verses carry us through Paul's work at Corinth on the second journey. And really verse 18 wraps it up, that he tarried there after this many days. Let's go through 1 through 4 here. Kate, if you would read that for us. Acts 18, 1 through 4.
After these things, Paul departed from Athens and went to Corinth, and he found a certain Jew named Aquila, born in Pontus, who had recently come from Italy with his wife Priscilla, because Claudius had commanded all Jews to depart from Rome, and he came to them. So because he was of the same trade, he stayed with them and worked, For by occupation they were tent makers. Did you say 4?
4.
And he reasoned in the synagogue every Sabbath and persuaded both Jews and Greeks.
All right, so he leaves Athens, he comes to Corinth, and he finds this husband-wife couple who had actually been in Italy, particularly the city of what? Into verse 2. Rome. And they had left because Claudius had issued an edict that the Jews, because of turmoil that had been caused, he just had an edict that they had to be expelled. Having my note that there were estimated about 20,000 Jews during that time that had to leave. But they weren't from Rome. Aquila was actually from Pontus. Yeah, so see if I've got the map shows Pontus, close here to this region, to the Black Sea. And so here, they're way over here in Rome. They left Rome, and they've come to Corinth, but he's originally from here. So they were, and we'll see, I've got another chart too, that they are travelers with Paul. They are helping. They're going to leave Corinth, and they'll go with Paul over to Ephesus, and they'll stay there when he goes on down and finishes up the second journey, and then comes back to Ephesus, and they're still there. And then a little bit later, they will be in Rome when he writes from the city of Corinth to the Romans. I've got a note on that. But anyway, they are a tremendous help to Paul. And what was their occupation? We mentioned a while ago, tent makers. Most understand this would have been working with goat hair, the type of a leather. I remember reading A.T. Robertson at one point, made the point, when Paul told Timothy to study to show yourself approved unto God, a workman that needs to be rightly dividing, literally cutting a straight line. It's almost like here's a pattern, and he knew exactly what it meant to cut a straight line with goat hair, or the making tents. And he says that's you got to cut a straight line, as it were, when you go through the Scripture. Handle it accurately. Be careful with how you go through. Anyway, let's read on. Paula, if you would, 5 through 11, please.
And when Silas and Timotheus were come from Macedonia, Paul was pressed in the Spirit and testified to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. And when they opposed themselves and blasphemed, he shook his raiment and said unto them, Your blood be upon your own heads. I am clean from henceforth. I will go unto the Gentiles. And he departed thence and entered into a certain man's house named Justus, one that worshipped God, whose house joined hard to the synagogue. And Crispus, the chief ruler of the synagogue, believed on the Lord with all his house. And many of the Corinthians, hearing, believed and were baptized. Then spake the Lord to Paul in the night by a vision, Be not afraid, but speak and hold not thy peace. For I am with thee, and no man shall set on thee to hurt thee. For I have much people in this city. And he continued there 1 year and 6 months, teaching the word of God among them.
All right. Now, verse 5 will figure in significantly in reconstructing the letters that Timothy and Silas come from Macedonia, where Thessalonica was up there, and they evidently, in addition to this, they bring Paul a pretty decent report of how things are going in Thessalonica. And he's been making tents, but then in verse 5, he's constrained by the word. We don't have all the information here, but we do have information from the letters that they evidently brought Paul support, and he could give his time fully. He was constrained by the word, testifying to the Jews that Jesus was Christ. He's giving more time. Now, he's been going into the synagogue every Sabbath. And then when Silas and Timothy come, he's giving even more time, but trouble arises. they opposed themselves and blasphemed. And so he says, your blood be upon your heads. I am clean. Henceforth we go to the Gentiles. So he began taking the disciples and meeting in the home of Titus Justus, and one who worshiped God. And yet, what's a good word? Hostile as the Jews were, Crispus, who is what? A ruler of the synagogue, believed in the Lord with all his house. Many of the Corinthians hearing believed and were baptized, including Crispus. And so obviously, Paul had made serious inroads into the synagogue among the even the ruler of the synagogue. But they don't stop there. He still, Paul is has some feelings of trepidation about all of this because the Lord appeared to Paul in a vision at night and told him what in the verse 9? Don't be afraid. Don't hold your peace. In other words, you just keep speaking. And, I'm going to be with you. And this is one of those particular places where he said, nobody's going to do what to you? Nobody's going to bother you. Nobody's going to persecute you here. Or at least nobody's going to stone you or kill you. And he says, for I have what? I have much people in there. Many people in this city. That was looked at, we might say, in promise and prospect. That the Lord knew the hearts of some people, that if the gospel would be preached to them, then they would obey. So he dwelt a year and a half teaching the word of the Lord. But the Jews didn't stop there. 12 through 17. Brother Charlie, if you would, let's see what happens.
But while Gallio was proconsul of Achaia, the Jews with one accord rose up against Paul, brought him before the judgment seat, saying, this man has persuaded men to worship God contrary to the law. But when Paul was about to open his mouth, Gallio said to the Jews, if it were a matter of wrong, or a vicious crime for the Jews, it would be reasonable for me to put up with you. But if these were questions about words and names of your own law, look after them yourselves. For I am unwilling to judge man on these matters. And he drove them away from the judgment seat. How far you go?
And go through 18.
Okay. And they said, and they all took hold of Sosthenes, the leader of the synagogue, and began beating him in front of the judgment seat. But Gallio was not concerned about any of these things.
All right, that's good. All right, so here Paul is going to be brought by the Jews before this fellow by the name of Gallio, who's proconsul, kind of a provincial governor. He's on the bema, the judgment seat. And first thing they said, this Paul is telling us things contrary to the law. That's all you need to say. That's all you need to say. You're bringing an ecclesiastical matter before a civil court. I don't have anything to do with that. And so when he started to drive them from the judgment seat, they got aggravated and took somebody else who's evidently they think makes them look bad. It's now the leader of the synagogue, whose name is Sosthenes. And what do? They beat him. And Gallio evidently just did what? He just turned a blind eye to it and just kind of let it go. And Paul tarries there yet many days. Yes, sir.
Identified they.
They would, I think, be the Jews. The Jews who had brought Paul before them.
So why were they beating the leader of the synagogue?
I don't know, Brother Gene, except the idea that evidently he was responsible for some of the
maybe he was a Christian.
If they beat Sosthenes, I take it that he wouldn't have been at that point, that he would still have been the ruler of the synagogue and leading them, and somehow they got aggravated with him. But I think he was the one that Paul, by the time of 1 Corinthians 1, Paul called apostle, and Sosthenes, our brother, I think he was Christian by that time. Yeah. Brother Gene, I don't know if all you heard, we were talking about Sosthenes here. I think there's more evidence than not that he's the one Paul identified in 1 Corinthians 1. And so you got Crispus, and then Sosthenes, two rulers of the synagogue who become Christians.
Philip,
Yes, sir.
all right, and all of Paul's talking here, he's not done any miracles. He just spoke the word of God, and people are reacting to that.
Mhm.
No miracle, just the power of the word.
None that we have recorded. Yeah, right. Yeah, but it is the power. In fact, he talked about that in 1 Corinthians 2. Yeah, that your faith might not stand in the wisdom of men, but the power of God. Yes, ma'am.
Is this Crispus and the Sosthenes, are they ruler of the same synagogue?
Well, that's the question. Sometimes you would think they might have been, but you can't tell. There could have been more than one synagogue in Corinth. It was a large city.
In the New King James in verse 17, it says, "Then all the Greeks to Sosthenes." Does it say that here?
No. What verse?
17.
17. Yeah, it just says they all laid hold on Sosthenes, the ruler of the synagogue. I'll do some searching on that. I did. If I've searched it, it's been a while.
It had
All
to
the
be
way
the guys
back
that
to
just
verse
brought him there, wouldn't
14.
Uh,
O Jews, it would be reasonable for me to put up with you.
mhm.
And then, your law, I'm unwilling to be a judge of these matters, and he drove them away,
Mhm.
the judgment, and
Be the
they
Jews.
took Sosthenes.
Yeah, it looks like it would be Jews, and I'll have to look at to why. There may be some manuscripts that include that, and that's what translation you use? The New King James? What's that? New King James. Okay.
That's all the Greeks.
What the New American Standard just has they, doesn't it? Yeah. Okay. Were you going to say something over here? I thought I heard. Anybody else? All right. So we can. A lot's going on in over a year and a half. On our page 34 of our booklets, Paul's departure from Athens was different from other departures such as Philippi, Thessalonica, and Berea. How was it different, and what may have been the reason? Well, he left without being what?
Driven out.
That's right, without being run out a lot, and possibly due to their indifference toward him. Whom did Paul meet in Corinth, and why were they there? All right, and why were they there? They had been.
Commanded.
That's right. Claudius had issued an edict. I mentioned in the note, overall, Claudius, from 41 to 54, respected the Jewish religion, but after many disputes, he dealt harshly with them, expelling them from Rome in AD 49. Some historians state that there were over 20,000 Jews in Rome at the time. Whether Aquila and Priscilla were Christians before Paul arrived is difficult to tell. Usually Luke identifies people if they're disciples or not. It would seem that they were not. If they had been converted before Paul met them, it's possible they'd been among those Jews from Pontus who were present on the day of Pentecost. Could have been. Or had been converted by disciples in Rome who had been converted on that notable day. However, if they were already disciples, it's difficult to account for Luke's silence in reference to that fact. Whatever the case, they quickly become a strong influence for good in the progress of the church. All right, from other passages, we learn the relation Paul had with this godly couple, and it continues out. It's kind of like, Barnabas and Silas, Timothy. They're close friends the rest of their lives, comrades in arms, so to speak. Note to the side of the following verses what we learn. Acts 18, 18, and 19. They went with Paul where?
Yes.
To Ephesus. And then they remained there. Yeah, you'll notice in 18, they sailed thence for Syria. They didn't make it all the way to Syria. They set sail for Syria, and with him Priscilla and Aquila, having shorn his head in Cenchrea. And they came to Ephesus. So there's your answer. They came to Ephesus. And then 24 through 26, what do?
They explained to Apollos the will of God.
Yeah. Here's this high-powered orator from Alexandria who knew spoke eloquently concerning the ways of the Lord, but he was mistaken on what? The
Baptism of John.
baptism of John. And so they took him unto them and expounded unto him the way of God more accurately. Romans 16:3, in Paul's salutation there, what does he say about them? They were fellow workers, and in fact, they'd even
The church in their house.
the church in their house, hazarded their necks for Paul. 1 Corinthians 16:9, what does it say? He saluted them and what? The church in their house. And then Paul's last letter, 2 Timothy 4, they were evidently back in Ephesus. And what does Paul want? Yes. Let me see if I've got this here. Here it is. This is, I copied and pasted something I had in the Romans workbook. I mentioned it's enriching to follow the lives of this couple as it related to Paul. Answer the following questions. I've done it for you. And the wonderful lessons can be made from a character study of this fine first century husband and wife. I think I've mentioned in lessons before. I've actually developed a kind of a lesson, well, about 3 of them, actually out of that to deal with people who are planning to marry. The close-knit that had to be between this couple is obvious. We first meet them in Acts 18 that we just studied. Paul was in Corinth. They came originally from Rome because Claudius had issued an edict that the Jews depart. Aquila was a man of Pontus. And then where we just have been, at Corinth, Paul found them, and some translations said stayed or abode with them, since they worked in the same occupation. And that shows their hospitality early on. They housed Paul. And then when he left Corinth, they went with him to the city of Ephesus. And that was during the second journey that we're studying. Must have remained there for some time, because later on Paul's third journey, when he wrote 1 Corinthians from Ephesus, he sent greetings from Aquila and Prisca, which is actually, Priscilla is actually the shortened form. Prisca would be the more formal name. And from the church, and Brother Gene answered that a while ago, the church was meeting in their house. Now that says a lot about a couple. Could you have one that says, I don't want anybody coming in our house, this is our house? It takes two to do that. So you have harmony, you have unity among them, hospitality, and both of them are interested in spiritual things to the point that we want brethren to come and meet with us in our home. And later, when Paul wrote the Roman epistle from Corinth, Aquila and Prisca were back in Rome and had opened their house in which the church could assemble in those verses there. And then last, we see their names appearing in 2 Timothy 4, where Paul instructs Timothy to salute them. Seems to be ample evidence that Timothy was in Ephesus when Paul wrote the last letter. And if so, then Aquila and Prisca went from Rome back to Ephesus and aided Timothy in the work when we last hear of them. So you just go here, Pontus and Rome and Corinth and Ephesus and back to Corinth, back to Rome, and then back to Ephesus. And everywhere they went. There's a couple over in East Albertville, and they were so fond of Brother Sutton, Brother Carroll Sutton. And Brother Sutton would sometimes hold meetings up in eastern Kentucky, and guess who would come and visit that couple? Would just drive all the way there and spend the night and drive all the way back home. The people who mean so much to the cause and encouragement and all that. That's what Aquila and Priscilla were. And it's a wonderful, wonderful couple. Okay, we've got about a minute. Number 4, we've already gone over this. Their trade was tent makers. 5, while Paul made tents for a living, where did he spend his Saturdays? That's right, in the synagogue. He reasoned and persuaded Jews and Greeks. Note 18:4, the Greeks connected with the synagogue. Compare chapter 13:43. These Greeks were likely what we would call, or God-fearers. God-fearers would have been Gentiles who would have accepted the law, but likely had not had engage in circumcision, but they were worshipers of God. The following passages relate information concerning Paul's support while in Corinth. State briefly what that information is to the side of the verses. Like 1 Corinthians 9, when Paul was at Corinth, what we're reading about here in Acts 18, did he accept support after they got kicked off? No, he did not. In 2 Corinthians 11, he talks about that because he had some enemies there. He said he did what? That's worked with his own hands, and he robbed other churches, taking wages of them that he might minister them. And then in Philippians 4:15 and 16, evidently what church helped in his support in Corinth? Philippi, yeah. So that's obvious from those passages. Okay, let's see. This is a good place to stop, actually. Lord willing, Sunday morning, we put a little bit together with the writing of the epistles. Paul, Silas and Timothy come to him there in verse 5. The New American Standard, Charlie, does your edition say, began devoting himself completely to the word there in verse 5? The older, I think. The older. 18:5, yeah.
Paul began devoting himself completely to the word.
Yes, completely. Yeah, so beforehand he was doing what? Making tents. And now it doesn't say that Silas and Timothy bring support, but that's what's stated in Philippians 4, 2 Corinthians 11, and so they come in, and then all of a sudden he gives himself completely to the word. He's not having to make tents. Then all that makes sense with the other letters. We'll just have to stop and, Lord willing, pick up. Any comment, question, last question?
Just a little bit of logistics. When they left the port of Corinth, it says they were headed for Syria, meaning back to Antioch in Syria, which was a long way away.
Yes.
At that point in time.
Right. And then stopped at Ephesus. Yeah, very good. Okay, thank you for your help.